Stop! Before you watch another video today, answer me this. What would it take to kill a city? Not damage it. Not occupy it. Not rename it. Kill it. Completely. Permanently. Forever. Because every empire that ever tried to do that to Tbilisi, the Arabs, the Mongols, the Persians, the Ottomans, the Russians, Tamerlane himself, every single one of them failed. 29 times this city was invaded, burned, looted, and left for dead. 29 times its people came back. Rebuilt the walls. Rebuilt the churches. Rebuilt their lives. And the city is still there today. This is not a story about destruction. This is a story about something far more dangerous than any army. This is a story about a city that simply refused to die. To understand why every empire in history wanted Tbilisi, you need to look at a map. Tbilisi sits at the crossroads of everything. To the west, the Black Sea and Europe. To the east, the Caspian Sea and Central Asia. To the north, the vast Russian steppes. To the south, Persia, the Middle East, and the ancient Silk Road. Every trade route between east and west passed through or near this valley. Every army marching between Asia and Europe had to deal with whoever controlled this city. Tbilisi was not just a city. It was a key. And every empire that rose to power wanted that key. The city was founded in the 5th century, traditionally attributed to King Vakhtang Gorgasali of Georgia, who according to legend discovered the location when his hunting falcon chased a pheasant into a warm sulfur spring. The bird fell in and was cooked alive by the naturally heated water. The king, enchanted by the steaming springs, decided to build his capital there. He named it Tbilisi, from the Georgian word meaning warm. It was a beautiful beginning for a city that would spend the next 15 centuries being set on fire. If you have never heard this story, you are going to want to stay. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. The trouble started almost immediately. In 626 AD, barely a century after the city was founded, the Persians seized Tbilisi and turned it into a northern military outpost. The Christian Georgian population suddenly found themselves living under Zoroastrian Persian rule. Then the Arabs came. In 736 AD, the Arab general Marwan ibn Muhammad swept through the Caucasus with an army so large and so brutal that Georgians called him Mervan Kru, Mervan the Deaf, because he was deaf to mercy. He took Tbilisi and held it. For the next 4 centuries, 400 years, Tbilisi was ruled by Arab emirs. The city the Georgian kings had built as their Christian capital became an Islamic emirate. Churches were converted. The language of administration changed. The population lived under foreign rule for generations. And yet, Tbilisi survived. The Georgians did not disappear. They did not assimilate entirely. They maintained their language, their faith, their identity, stubbornly, quietly, waiting. Then the Seljuk Turks arrived in the 11th century, taking the city from the Arabs and adding it to their expanding empire. Tbilisi had now been ruled by Persians, Arabs, and Turks, and it had not yet celebrated its 7th century of existence. In 1122, everything changed. A Georgian king named David, who history would later call David the Builder, led his army to the walls of Tbilisi and took it back. After nearly 5 centuries of foreign rule, Tbilisi was Georgian again. What followed was the most extraordinary period in the city's history. Under David and then under his granddaughter Queen Tamar, one of the most remarkable rulers in medieval history, Tbilisi exploded into a golden age. The population grew. Trade flourished. Churches, roads, and palaces were constructed. Poets wrote. Scientists studied. The city became known across the entire Caucasus as a place of culture, tolerance, and power. David built a palace specifically for Muslim poets to live and work in, a Christian king creating a cultural sanctuary for Islamic scholarship in his own capital. At its peak, Tbilisi was one of the great cities of the medieval world. It lasted exactly 1 century. In 1226, a Khwarezmian sultan named Jalal ad-Din descended on Tbilisi with a massive army. He took the city, slaughtered thousands of its inhabitants, and committed an act so deliberately cruel it has been remembered for 800 years. He ordered the icons, the sacred painted images from every Christian church in the city, to be carried out and laid across the bridge over the Kura River. Then he ordered every Christian in Tbilisi to walk across the bridge. To do so, they would have to step on the face of Christ. Those who refused were executed on the spot. The golden age of Tbilisi ended on that bridge. If Jalal ad-Din was devastating, what came next was almost incomprehensible. The Mongols. In 1236, the armies of the Mongol Empire swept through the Caucasus and took Tbilisi, adding it to the largest contiguous empire in human history. For the next century, the city existed under Mongol domination, its culture suppressed, its wealth extracted, its population living under occupation. Then, just as the Mongols were finally driven out and Georgia began to rebuild, Tamerlane arrived. Between 1386 and 1403, a period of just 17 years, Tamerlane's armies invaded Georgia 8 separate times. 8 times. He sacked Tbilisi on his first invasion. He captured the Georgian king. He massacred the population repeatedly. He destroyed everything that had been rebuilt after the Mongols with a thoroughness that seemed almost personal. By the time Tamerlane was finished with Georgia, the kingdom that had produced a golden age of culture and built one of the great medieval cities of the world had been reduced to a shadow of itself. The population of Georgia had collapsed. Entire regions were depopulated. Cities that had stood for centuries were abandoned. And Tbilisi, burned, looted, and bled dry, began again. The 15th, 16th and 17th centuries brought no relief. Tbilisi now became the prize in a new contest between the Persian Safavid Empire to the south and the Ottoman Turkish Empire to the west. For 2 centuries the city changed hands repeatedly between these two powers, each one burning what the other had built, each one taking what the other had left behind. The Georgians, exhausted, outnumbered, and desperate, looked north for help. In 1783 the Georgian king signed the Treaty of Georgievsk with Russia. Russia promised to protect Georgian autonomy. Russia promised not to interfere in Georgian internal affairs. Russia promised to be an ally, not an occupier. 12 years later, in 1795, before Russia had honored a single promise, the Persian Shah Aga Mohammad Khan arrived at Tbilisi with an army of 40,000 men. The Russian protection that Georgia had been promised did not arrive. The city fell in 2 days. What followed was one of the most brutal sacks in Tbilisi's long history of being brutally sacked. The Persians burned the city to the ground. They drowned priests in the Kura River. They looted every church and palace. They took between 15,000 and 50,000 people captive, men, women, and children, and marched them back to Persia as slaves. When they left, Tbilisi was a smoking ruin. And Russia, which had promised protection, finally showed up. 6 months too late. Russia used the destruction as justification to annex Georgia entirely. In 1801 the Georgian kingdom that had survived Arabs, Byzantines, Mongols, Khwarezmians, Timurids, Persians, and Ottomans was absorbed into the Russian Empire. They had survived every invader. They could not survive their protector. Today Tbilisi is a city of 1.1 million people. It is beautiful in a way that only cities built and rebuilt and built again can be. Its old town, Dzveli Tbilisi, is a labyrinth of carved wooden balconies overhanging narrow streets, Orthodox churches standing beside Persian-era mosques standing beside synagogues standing beside Catholic cathedrals. Every religion that ever conquered this city left a building behind. The sulfur baths that King Vakhtang's falcon died in 15 centuries ago still flow with naturally heated water. Locals still bathe in them. The Narikala fortress, built, destroyed, and rebuilt so many times that its current stones contain layers from 6 different centuries, still stands above the old city on a rocky ridge, looking out over the same valley that every invader in history has marched through. Georgia regained its independence in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. Tbilisi became a capital again, for the fourth or fifth time depending on how you count. And the city that was burned 29 times is now one of the fastest growing tourist destinations in the world. People come from everywhere to walk the streets that Tamerlane walked, to eat in the restaurants built on foundations that the Persians burned, to photograph the churches that Arab emirs tried to erase. They come to stand in a city that should not exist, that has no logical reason to still be here. And yet, 29 invasions. 29 times someone looked at this city and decided it was finished. 29 times the people of Tbilisi looked back and said, "Not yet." That is not history. That is something deeper than history. That is the story of what human beings do when everything is taken from them and they still choose to come back. If that story moved you, hit subscribe right now. Because every week Vaulted Cities goes to another city the world forgot and tells the story it never wanted told. And drop a comment below. Tell me which invasion of Tbilisi shocked you the most. Was it the Mongols, Tamerlane, or the Persian destruction of 1795? I read every comment, and your answer might decide which city we cover next. Every city has shadows. We go there.